Activate your energy.
Welcome to the Activated Authors Podcast, a show where we distill the core principles of what it takes to become a happy, healthy, and productive author, no matter what stage of the journey you're at. I'm your host, Daniel Willcocks. I'm an international best-selling author, as well as an author coach, speaker, and creative entrepreneur. But most importantly, I'm a lifelong student of all things productivity, psychology, and human behavior. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Without further ado, let's dive in. What is up, Activators? And welcome back to another episode of the Activated Authors Podcast with myself, Daniel Willcocks. And not here with me every week is this fluffy little bundle of love, Luna, who for people who are watching on YouTube, we get to see the little fluffy dog in the brand new environment, in the brand new home of your host, Daniel Willcocks. Sam is not with me for today's episode for reasons that we'll probably go into at a later date, but this is going to be a little bit of a break in the formula. I've got a few updates for you, and then I've got a special episode for you guys today based off of one of the lives that I did last week, which I'll go into very, very shortly. For now, I'm going to bypass the usual how are you, because this week has been fun, it's been cool, it's been busy, and it's quite late at night, as you can see from the time of recording, and I've got to get the little fluffers to bed. But we'll go straight into this week's weekly wins, and I'm very, very excited to share Emma G's weekly win, which is that she has just signed with her first contract client. Our first client has signed the contract, and they're going to be starting work together very, very soon. So a huge, huge congratulations to Emma. In my world, a couple of small updates in that I have no updates. These are always so professional, aren't they? Yeah, I'm still chipping away at trying to get things sorted, trying to get all things in order. Been doing a lot of traveling this week. For people who want a little update on my health, probably less so the stuff that's happened the last few weeks, but I've had a few, I want to say, updates on my fingers. It's not really been updates. I have been scanned in an MRI machine to see if there's anything wrong with my shoulders. I might be putting pressure on my nerves and making my fingers all tingling and strange. And then I've got another appointment this Wednesday that I asked for 14 months ago with rheumatology. So with any luck, hopefully something will be found soon, and I'll be able to get back up to typing speed as I wish. Hey, hello. It's unusual for you, isn't it? I've been away for a few days. This is a nice big cuddle with Luna. So yeah, just trying to mosey on, get that going through, settle into this new place, and just try and get back on track with stuff. But it's very much a work in progress. So one more quick update before we go into today's episode. Activated Authors Podcast is going to go on a very short break, just while I get some stuff together. Sam does some bits in the background. And we're going to take a few weeks off with the aim of being back at the beginning of June. So about 4 or 5 weeks, bit of a gap just so we can rest up, realign, and I can work everything out now that I'm coming back to work to see what would best bring value to you guys. So now would be a perfect time. If you've got any ideas, any questions, anything that you want to share, anything you want us to answer, any guests that you might want us to have come on, I'd be very interested to find out which kinds of episodes you guys find more helpful, whether it's sort of the interview ones with other authors, or whether it's a case of me and Sam shooting the shit and answering questions based on our own experiences. But yeah, we'll be jumping off the airwaves for a few weeks, and we'll be back in June. I don't want to say February then. We'll be back in June with a few more episodes. So stick around, keep us on the feed, and we'll be coming back for that. If you want to find out more about us in the meantime, while we are away, feel free to jump over to Activated Authors. You get 30 days free trial where you can just jump in, try out the membership, come and say hi to all the authors, jump on the sprints with myself and with Sam and Eden and Emmy, of course. And yeah, we'd love to see you over there. So loads of ways to connect with us in the meantime. Now for today's episode, this is an especially long one, but it was an especially fun one. Earlier, I believe it was last week or so, I was invited very, very kindly onto the Writer's Mindset podcast to join Ellie Betts Kristina Adams and Matty Dalrympie from the Indy Author podcast. And the subject of what we were talking about in that session is, you are so fast asleep already, was how to write ghost stories, or writing ghost stories. And before people kind of switch away, because I know that I talk a lot about horror, and I'm very much a sort of deep horror author, and I like all the dark and stuff. This is not that kind of episode, because as we should all know, ghosts can come in all different spectrums, all different shapes and sizes. So we're not specifically talking about campfire ghost stories that are meant to make you crap your pants. These are even just a case of featuring ghosts in your story and what that looks like. So we cover the full spectrum on different types of ghosts, different types of stories that can feature ghosts, We talk specifically on how to craft fear, how to leverage the other side, whether we personally believe in ghosts in our own little ghost stories. And it was just a really fun conversation. We had a lot of questions. We had one of our very own over on that live chat with Kiz joined us over their live. So hi again, Kiz, if you listen to this. Thanks again for joining us. But yeah, you've got an hour and a half here of wonderful goodness. And what I will do just for the other guys who are in this episode, I will put their details all down in the show notes so that you can follow the Writer's Mindset. You can follow the Indie Author Podcast. Definitely say hi to Matty. Definitely say hi to Kristina. Definitely say hi to Ellie. And yeah, I guess without further ado, let's jump into the episode. So roll it.
So, hello and welcome to this YouTube live stream with some of my favorite authors to discuss writing ghost stories. So, I am Ellie Betts. With me today are Matty Dalrympie from the Indie Author Podcast.
Hello.
We have Daniel Willcocks from the Activated Authors Podcast, and my favorite podcast co-host, Miss Kristina Adams, from our very own Writer's Mindset podcast. First and foremost, then, Matty, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I am Matty Dalrymple. I am the author of the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also write, speak, and consult on the writing craft and the publishing voyage. And I podcast about what I know and learn from my guests on the Indie Author Podcast.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Daniel Willcocks, tell the audience what it is that you do, please.
Hello. So yeah, I'm Daniel Willcocks. I started writing it was 2015 when I first released my first ever fiction novel, and it's been an adventure from there. So now I am the CEO of Activated Authors, and I do all the coaching and help authors behind the scenes there. I am the founder of Devil's Rock Publishing, which focuses primarily on horror fiction. And I write my own horror fiction and do all things creepy with the Other Stories podcast, which is a horror podcast. So I'm quite excited to get stuck in and talk all things ghosts today.
It's definitely an interesting topic. Mm-hmm. And Kristina / Kristina Adams / whichever name you want to use today, remind us who the hell you are, please.
So my name is Kristina Adams. I am one half of the Writer's Mindset team. I have published 20 books, 5 of which are ghost stories, the latest of which is The Mean Girls Murder, which came out last month, and I can't even hold up right. And that's it. I still love that cover. And I can't remember what I would say. I talk about my dog a lot, and I have a sore throat, so it may sound a bit dodgy or just start making absolutely no sense because it's sending me delirious. So yeah, could get interesting.
The usual then.
Thanks.
Normal form.
Thanks, Ellie.
The first question I have on my little roster here today, then, everyone, is: do you believe in ghosts? Let's pick anyone first. Dan first.
That's a question. So I kind of flip back and forth. I think where I've settled over the years is that I'm pretty, I don't even know that it's agnostic. I think just broadly speaking, I'm one of those people where if you can't disprove something or prove something, I'm not going to claim that I don't believe in it or that it can't be there. So, I've seen a lot of things over the years, not really firsthand because they've all been explained with like hindsight or science. But there have been a lot of things that I've watched and read and heard from different people who have experienced things that are, for want of a better way of saying it, unexplainable. I am a believer that there are forces outside of what humans can understand that, make sense. And if we are all stardust and matter that has come from the Big Bang and the cosmic universe, and that's, proven to be in every single one of us, then why can't matter then exist in alternate ways that we might not necessarily understand? So I'm not a firm believer. I'm not someone that goes like, yes, they absolutely exist, but I'm definitely not a denier.
That's such a logical answer. I like that.
I'm a logical guy.
In science, yeah.
Also, I would very quickly like to add for people watching, most people watching this YouTube, I have an ulcer, so if my mouth goes a bit weird or I'm like I stumble, that's why I have a very big ulcer. But I'll throw that in.
Oh no, that sounds horrendous. What about yourself, Matty? Do you believe in ghosts?
I would agree with what Daniel said, that I myself have never had an encounter with a ghost that I'm aware of, at least. I've had the fortunate situation that my husband's family has. My husband has a great story of being at the Gettysburg battlefield, and if any place was going to be haunted, it would be the Gettysburg battlefield. And this was many years ago, he had gone with his family, and they were out on the battlefield at night, and they were walking back from the historic location that they had visited, and he felt his dad sort of pushing him along from behind, like he was trying to get him to hurry along, and he turned around and nobody was there.
That's
so
spooky.
I love things like that, and I myself have never had that kind of experience. I think I'm the kind of person that would always try to figure out a way to explain it logically first, but I agree with Daniel that it seems perfectly plausible to me. I just feel like I haven't been in maybe the right place at the right time.
Yeah, very logical again. I don't know. I feel like we need more of a believer here, and Casey Adams is not going to be that person for me. I already know it.
No, I don't believe in them. I'm not I like to be open to things, but I know that the mind can play the most horrific tricks on us, and 99% of things can be explained by the mind essentially being a massive dickhead to us. So
I mean, yes, I think personally I would just tip over into the realm of believing, but I'm yet to see anything super concrete enough to fully say, yes, I believe.
I mean, some weird stuff happens in your house. There has been some
loads
weird
of weird
stuff in your house.
in my house.
We need stories.
Just like things being knocked over for seemingly no reason, and like doors being opened. I'd be sat in the lounge, which is below my bedroom, and I hear footsteps all the time going across my bedroom, but never when I'm in the bedroom. Just lots of little things that, like, again, I'm like, I can't see what else would be doing that, but it's not enough. Like, I need to see that ghost walk across the bedroom. But maybe one day. Do you
We're all
think
such
then,
cynics.
Yeah, maybe we're not the best people to ask. Do you think then you have to believe in ghosts to write a ghost story, Kristina?
No. Obviously, because we've all managed to write about scary things. For me, like I said, the mind loves playing tricks on us, right? And it loves, particularly when we're in some sort of state of fear, all sorts of crazy things can happen. If you're in a prolonged state of fear, if you're trapped in fight or flight mode, that can be a trigger for chronic pain, for fatigue, for brain fog, for tinnitus, and all sorts when you're stuck in that. So it's not a massive leap for the brain to then invent things like hearing noises, like seeing things when we're in that state of fear. And one of the podcasts that I listened to, Uncanny, highly recommend, they did an experiment on the host. Dan's nodding. Did you listen to that episode, Dan?
Not that one, no, but I'm familiar with the podcast.
Yeah, it was in season 1, I think. Or it might have been the Battersea Poltergeist they experimented on him, which is the same host. And basically, they made him stay up overnight, possibly for like 2 days, watching horror movies on his own. And it got to the point where he was just terrified of everything, and all his senses were heightened. So even the tiniest sound, the smallest situation, he was absolutely terrified and imagining all these things, when actually it was just the what's the word? Not the guy running the experiment doing these things in that environment. And so it goes to show actually what that state of fear can do to us. So I think, believing in ghosts or not believing in ghosts can influence how you write, and it can potentially make it more interesting. And that's what makes your story uniquely yours as well. If I wasn't listening to things like Uncanny and reading different ghost books, like I've got one downstairs on ancient Egyptian magic for a future book research, if it wasn't for those things, the stuff would turn out very differently.
I like that. So do you listen to those stories of people getting scared regardless of whether or not it's real, and use that kind of scared experience in your writing then?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I think it's useful for stuff like Uncanny, because when I'm listening to that, they have people who believe and people who don't believe analyzing the story. And that's why it really appeals to me, because it's showing both sides of the argument. So I like that balanced angle. And one of my characters is a parapsychologist, and he can see ghosts as well. So he knows when they're real and when they're not. And obviously most of us don't have that luxury. But for him, he's also deeply skeptical of certain methods. Like one of my favorite scenes that I wrote recently was him having a massive rant about dowsing rods, and his girlfriend's like, come away, crazy person, come away. She's just trying to guide him out of the shop, and he's just going off on one.
I like that. What about you, Matty? Do you find not believing gets in the way at all, or do you find it helps with your writing of ghost stories?
Well, I don't know that I suppose it helps in the sense that I'm not bound by actual experiences that I might feel like, oh, well, the experience is or isn't like this. I've just always been fascinated with the idea of a world where 90% of it is normal, but you just tweak one thing. And for me, for the Ann Kinnear books, the one thing is that she can sense and later in the series communicate with dead people. And I just find that fascinating. The sort of theme of my books is what happens when an extraordinary ability transforms an ordinary life. So for Anne, that extraordinary ability is her ability to sense dead people. And I think that from the point of view of writing a story, there's just something intrinsically interesting and lots of things you can do with the idea of someone who can speak to dead people, because, not only is there the whole background of how does she feel about this ability that she has, she has to deal with people who think she's crazy or think she's lying or think she's a charlatan or whatever. But also just practically, she can speak to people who, for example, saw the crime happen. And then she has the dilemma of, well, now she knows who done it. What does she do with that information? So it's just, to me, an intrinsically interesting and almost limitless opportunity for fun plot twists and story ideas.
I like that concept of it freeing you, because I suppose, like you say, if you did have all these really firm beliefs about ghosts and how they worked and stuff, that could be very limiting potentially, couldn't it?
Yeah, I've done lots of research into other aspects of my books, but I've never done research into the ghost aspect because I want to completely make it up. And I don't want to read something that says, the air is always colder around a ghost. Well, if it's convenient for me to make it warmer, then I want to be able to make it warmer without being burdened with factual information about what the ghost experience is like.
Yeah, facts. Authors, we don't need to worry about that, right?
No.
Throw
I
that
want to be
straight
free
out the
from
window.
facts.
I've got to say, I am the opposite, purely because it means it's less work. I do the research because I like learning new things anyway. So then I just manipulate it to what I want. So I try and base what I'm writing as much kind of in reality as possible. And in The Witch's Sacrifice, which is book 4, there was this scene where I had to have someone go missing. And I was like, well, how would this work? How would they report that to the police? And how would that? I'm like, hold on a minute. They're ghosts. They're necromancers. There's a witch. A reader's really going to care about one sentence? But there was this part of me obsessing over that one sentence description more than the ghost element.
Yeah, I think that the important thing is you're making it consistent within the world you've built, right? If you've decided that the ghosts in your story behave in a certain way, then you have to make sure that they either keep behaving that way or you have a damn good explanation of why it's different in this case. You can't just say, oh, and what else? They can teleport to another part of the country.
Yeah, I actually had that issue with book 5. I had that issue with book 5 because I needed to up the ante. And I was like, how do I do that? So I had to make this ghost more powerful than everything else I have ever done, whilst not breaking the law that I'd spent 4 books building, not shooting myself in the foot for the next 5 to 10 books, because it's going to be quite a long series.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of work and a lot of headaches, but the reader reaction has actually been phenomenal. I've never had a more positive reaction, and several of my ARC readers who've been with me since for a good few years now, even pre-Afterlife Calls, have said it's the best book I've ever written, and that just it completely floored me. I didn't expect that at all. I mean, it's amazing, obviously, but when you're that focused on just getting the thing done, you're not, half the time you're like, is this any good? I can't remember anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. What is life? I'm just surrounded by imaginary ghosts.
Maybe we all are right now, surrounded by real ghosts. We don't know, guys. We don't know, gang.
I mean, the amount of times Millie barks at absolutely nothing. Who knows anymore? Anything sets that dog off. So
I literally had my son one morning come down. And he was about 3, about 3. We're about to head out, and it was just us 2 in the house. And we got to the bottom of the stairs, and I was like, "Come on, then, let's go." And he literally just turned up, looked up the stairs, and went, "Bye, see you later." And there was no one there. I was like, "What have you seen?" Yeah. But I think for my answer to the question is like, if we have to believe in ghosts in order to write ghost stories, that kind of makes us crumble as writers, because there's so much that I write that I don't believe in, but like, you know, I've written stories about wendigos and vampires and werewolves and all these kind of things. And you don't ever have to believe in something in order to create a comprehensive experience. That's one of the things that we do as writers, is imagine and put ourselves in those shoes. And, you know, we're the conduit between those ideas and the readers who might be a bit more struggling to be creative. And one of the other things that I find quite interesting is that in this conversation so far, we've very much defaulted to what the Western view of a ghost is. And there hasn't been a discussion about, you know, all the different types of ghosts that might exist around the world. I was quite fortunate a few years ago, and obviously I can't go into the full details, but I ghostwrote through a series of books that involved someone who could speak to all different sorts of specters, and they traveled the globe and things. And so for that, a lot of the research was looking at folklore from, you know, Asia and Europe and America and Canada and Australia and all these different places. And there is so much in the way of ghost laws. Like, if you want to write a ghost story, but you're not really sure where to start, like, just load up the Wikipedia page on ghost law from the world, because, you know, people have different ideas on what happens if someone like has unfinished business. There are some really dark ones that I won't go into, because that goes right into the sort of very, very horror side. But, you know, there's animal ghost stuff, there's spiritual bits, you've got your poltergeists, you've got just general orbs and will-o'-wisps, and you've got all these different things that are, you know, quote, signs from the afterlife that people can explore and write and play with. And kind of like what you're saying, Kristina, you had to up that ante. And there's no reason you can't do that, because, you know, who's to say that whatever force came from one person that went into a spirit isn't then manifested and made bigger or conjoined? You know, there's kind of no limit when it comes to ghosts as to what you can do.
And I suppose as well, the thought that just occurred to me there was, obviously we're saying maybe we don't believe in ghosts, but we write ghost stories. A lot of authors don't believe in a lot of things they write. Like you say, Dan, vampires and wendigos and whatever anyone wants to write about. But I imagine a lot of the origins of these creatures come from stories where people did genuinely believe, right? The folklore tales, the stories that were shared around, I want to say the campfire then. That sounds really cliche, sharing stories around the campfire, but you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that is the heart of it. That's the origin of where all these stories came from. And I mean, ghost stories and horror stories, but like any kind of story, it all originated from that very small clustered sit around the campfire. And so much of it was, you know, early ancestors exploring what the world is and what the unknown is. And so a lot of our perceptions of ghosts and things are that legacy of, you know, people seeing things that they couldn't explain. And then Kristina, like, I totally agree with you. There are certain things where, like, my most vivid experience, in quote, with a ghost was a couple of years back, and I was lying in bed, and I used to have a Batman dressing gown that was basically black with yellow trim, and I hung that on the edge of my door, and I closed my door and went to bed, and I woke up at 1 a.m. for whatever reason, just a bit of a chill, opened my eyes, and there was just a woman, just like black and white imprinted, just leaning over me for like half a second before I sat up, turned on the light, and I was like, oh crap, like, what is this? And I'll be honest, I was really riled by it, because it's the middle of the night and you're confused. But then what I figured out was that I'd left the window open in my study, and the air had blown my door open to the point that where the dressing gown was, because the door was wide open at this point, the dressing gown was like right next to me. And as I looked at it very quickly in that moment, my very creatively addled mind from my dreams just went, ghost. And so that's where a lot of it does come from. But then I have unexplained things, like I had a loft hatch that literally had little metal hooks that hooked into, you know, where the hatch opened. So you have to unhook them to push it up. And I came out of my bedroom one morning, and that was just lifted and off. And there's like physically no way that I can think of to put into why that would happen. But then, you know, not everything can be explained.
Sometimes it's more fun when it's not.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that the fun when, you know, you get to retell these stories, and it shocks everyone around our little campfire here. Look.
Yes.
Out of interest, then, I'm going to start with Matty on this one. Where do you get your inspiration from, then? I know you said you don't necessarily research too much. You like to make things up. Where do you get that inspiration from if you don't believe in ghosts?
Well, the ghost part is almost incidental. I hate to say that, but after the first book, which is The Sense of Death, yay, which is almost, I realize, kind of the Anne Kinnear origin story. It's her ability in it is much less than in later books, and it's really sort of setting the stage for her coming to terms with it. It's not a mystery. It's the reader sees the murder happen, right on the page, and so it's really suspense in the sense that Anne's storyline and the murderer storyline are gradually converging over the course of the book. And of course, the question is, how will Anne fare when those two storylines intersect? But in the later books, her ability to communicate with spirits is much greater, and it's really like communicating with anyone. One of the points she makes to other characters in the book is there's no reason to be afraid of ghosts unless the person whose ghost it is was someone you would be afraid of. Like, ghosts aren't intrinsically more or less scary as ghosts than they were as people. That doesn't mean that some of them aren't problematic, but they would have been problematic if they were alive anyway. And so the stories I come up with are really have been based on all sorts of different things. In the case of The Sense of Death, it was based on a particular scene that I visualized very clearly in my mind. For my most recent book, which is Be With the Dead, it was because I wanted to write a book about the writing and publishing worlds. I thought this would be a fun place to do it. Sometimes it's on a topic, like I'm a big aviation buff. I took flying lessons for quite a while, which I stopped doing when I published my second book because I just had to pick what I was going to spend my time on. I was a plane owner for a brief period of time, but I love aviation. And here's my Avondale Airport is one of the airports in The Falcon and the Owl, which is my third book. So that was inspired by me wanting to write a story about aviation. And of course, if they're going to be dead people, there's going to be a plane crash and like that. So the inspirations come from many different areas, but they're usually not based on it being a ghost story. The ghosts sort of factor in just as any character would factor into that story that's coming from a different inspiration.
That's cool. It's kind of like the story and the characters first, and the ghosts just add to it. They're an additional factor kind of thing.
Right. If you just happen to have a character who is invisible to a certain number of people and therefore can overhear things that people don't know they're overhearing or things like that, then it just it's like having a super adaptable character to put to work in a thriller or suspense mystery story.
Adds lots of interesting scenarios. What about yourself, Dan? I know you write about all sorts of terribly scary things. Where do you find inspiration for this kind of horror?
I mean, it's that typical question, isn't it? Like, it comes from everywhere. I think when it comes to writing things like ghosts, I do love a good haunted house story. So, you've got like Haunting of Hill House, Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. You've got House of Leaves. Technically isn't a ghost story, but it really plays on that sense of the unknown, and it's a beautiful book. But I very much am interested in the folklore stuff, like I kind of mentioned it. So those origin stories that are everywhere, where have they come from, how do they get somewhere? And what I tend to, it's not really what I've done so far, but it's something I'm very much intending to do now, is try to find more of those stories to tell some of the forgotten ones that don't get heard all that much. So like going into forests and going into creeks and swamps and just looking around the world to see where they come from. But, there are, as I've already mentioned, there are web pages just filled with different types of spirits, their origin and how they get there. There are books published by different houses that have all these folklore myths and different types of ghosts and stuff. And it really is, there are hundreds upon thousands. There was one, I can't remember all the ins and outs, but there was like a hag over in sort of Japan way. There are like goblin ghosts. There are all these different things that exist. And so, you can look at all of these and go, okay, you can have that kind of straight, what we perceive as ghosts, in our society, and just go, our friend has died, this person has died, and they're back in this way. Or you can get fun with it. You can get funky with it. You can get really, really creepy and kind of go, okay, there's like smoke slithering under the door. Now it's an amorphous shape that's turning into something solid. It's now at the end of the bed, and then suddenly it's not, and it's up behind you. And, there's all these different things that you can do to play with it that, it's fun. It's part of why we write, to be creative and just to find something different and have that joy. With ghosts and scaring people.
I was going to say, tapping into all those really common, relatable human fears, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. Like that's the heart of the ghost story and the reason why they've been so pervasive through the years. Because, you know, the earliest ghost story I remember ever hearing is the one about, you know, the person in the forest and the hook for the hand like swinging on the glass. I don't know if that like resonates with anyone. I can't remember the full thing, so I won't embarrass myself by saying the whole thing there. But like that kind of fear is such an innate human thing that we have to deal with from the minute that we're born until the moment that we die. And so ghost stories, in a way, are our way of kind of flirting with that line, playing with that and going, you know, how would I handle myself in this situation? You know, how do I harden myself to these kind of scenarios, which we know probably aren't going to happen, but other scary things will. And so it serves sometimes as a bit of a proxy for the darker things in life, which is kind of why I write horrors, because I use it in a way to process the darker things that I either haven't experienced or like I'm concerned about experiencing. But yeah, I mean, it has to, for me, a ghost story really has to play with the heart of what it is to be scared and to be human and to worry and to be in that unknown situation. And the most effective ghost stories that I've ever read are the ones that the ghosts aren't explained. And sometimes I think in Haunting of Hill House, they do, it's Susan, oh, what's her name? Hill?
Shirley Jackson.
Oh, Shirley Jackson. Why am I thinking? Yeah, Shirley Jackson. Thank you, mate.
The characters have Hill as the surname, I think. The house is still called Hill House, but I'm fairly sure the surname might be that. There is a character called Susan, so that'll be why you got the name Susan.
There we go. But yeah, like one of the things I loved about that was it was so slow to reveal anything horrific. You just saw what was happening through, or you heard it through walls, or like all these kind of really obscure twisting sort of motifs and things that really knock you unsteady and knock you off your feet. And I think that's where fear comes from, is that moment where you can really disorientate someone and take away the floor. And most of the time I really, you know, I've written monsters where I have put monsters in front of people, but most of the time I try for as long as I can just to hold back the actual reveal, because there's nothing scarier than what is in your own head of the unknown.
Absolutely. I've seen films, and I won't name and shame here. We don't like to name and shame when we're disappointed with what happened. But there was a film I watched, and it was sort of a late third edition to the series, and they like showed you what this monster looked like from the first two that's been like terrorizing them for these three films. And it was at that point that I just lost it. I was like, this is rubbish. Like, that's not even scary anymore. It's a lot scarier when it's unknown, right? When anything is possible.
Yes, it's the same in there's a film called The Ritual, which was a book originally by a guy called Adam Neville, and the book is phenomenal because you never really see the creature, but then in the film, like, to be fair, like most of the film you don't see it, but in the last sort of couple of minutes you do, and it's never going to be as scary as you think it is. Like, your head will do everything to scare the hell out of you, and the minute you put a face to it, it's the same with when I first saw the visual reveal for Voldemort in the Harry Potter films. I was like, he's no longer scary to me. Like, it's just not like in my head. I don't know what I was picturing, but it just wasn't that.
I think a great example of avoiding that is Blair Witch Project, because you really never see.
Yeah, that's what I was talking
totally
about.
In your mind, yeah. That's brilliant.
Name and shame. Okay, the third one in the series is terrible. Don't see it.
I haven't seen any of them.
I thought the first one was great.
So effective. And yeah, like you say, it shows so much of what you can do to build fear without having to show any monster at all.
Yeah, exactly. And just that end scene where you walk in and they're facing the wall. I was playing Animal Crossing earlier and walked into my neighbor's house, and they were facing the wall in the opposite corner, and it still got me.
Yeah,
on Animal Crossing.
Yeah,
that's how good Blair Witch was. Yeah. Maybe that's just me being a scaredy cat. It could be. What about you, Kristina? I know you said you like to do lots of research. Is that where you draw most of your inspiration from?
I feel like I can't top Dan's answer. Why did you pick me last?
That's always the risk when we have such excellent guests.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I do like to do lots of research. I have very varied interests. Ancient Egypt, the Victorians, that's both history actually. Nutrition, dogs. Like, they're kind of all over the place, but my brain finds weird ways to make connections. Like, the premise for the Mummy's Curse was like, what if I put a character in a coma? Oh, comas, mummies are dead. They've got nothing to do with comas. But my brain made that link, and then I ended up, from that bizarre link, creating one of the most popular characters in the Afterlife Calls series, which is Fadil, who is a 4,000-year-old not mummy, because mummies don't have their internal organs, and he is actually alive. So I think for me it is a combination of the weird research rabbit holes that I go down researching things like ancient Egypt and the strange way that my brain works to make those connections. But also I'm really, really into psychology. That's probably one of my big loves other than writing, dogs, and skincare. And so because of that, I know a lot about the weird tricks that the brain can play on us and how to then put that into my writing and manipulate the characters.
That makes sense. I like that as well because there's that sort of, I don't remember the exact quote, but that you hear it a lot in writing advice in terms of don't just read one genre, don't just stick to one thing. Go out and experience life, and you will draw that inspiration, right, from who knows where. It's bound to kick you in the face sometime or other.
Yeah, can I just read out Cassie's quote? Cassie's comment is brilliant. She says she loves how the Victorians were totally like, oh, mummies have got to be good for you. Cheers! Gulps down powdered mummy. They did
Yeah,
eat mummies because they thought it had medicinal benefits.
Why wouldn't
and
it?
that's why we don't have very many of them left, because the Victorians were batshit.
Did not know that.
That's like that's only the top layer of how crazy they were. There's so much more, and that's part of why I wanted to bring them back into Afterlife Calls, because they just did so many crazy things. There's so many opportunities for like that just absurdist humor that's really fun to play with. So I just leaned into that. Again, it's that thing of like combining interest and the fact the Victorians were interested in ancient Egypt as well, so that already ties in with the foundations that I laid in book 2.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, who wouldn't want to eat a dried up dead body?
Or take part in the tapeworm diet. Thanks for that reminder, Cassie.
That's still a thing. Yeah.
What, is still a thing?
I'm sure I've seen something about it.
Everything's still a thing.
If we still had some mummies going spare, I'm sure people would still be eating them.
On that happy note, next question.
Yeah. Next question. I want to know about some of your favorite techniques to use there in terms of the actual telling of the ghost stories and the horror stories themselves. What about yourself, Dan? Is there any go-to tropes that you like? Go-to techniques that you'd like to use? Do you bring in ones from different genres? Anything and everything?
Yeah, so I think the big one is what I was speaking about before with, trying to really leave that reveal to the last minute, because I mean the key to scaring anyone is really just dropping those subtle clues so that people start to form their own monsters in their head. Because again, like, we all have our own fears, we all have our way of seeing the world, of the things that we hate, the things that we love. And so if you can drop enough of a breadcrumb trail to lead them to scare themselves, that really is huge for me. And yeah, it's just a case of, if you've got the ghost, if you're about to reveal, well, pop them in. Like, no, let me go back. So that's the breadcrumb bit. The other part is you really have to come up with a protagonist that people care about enough to put themselves in behind the driver's seat of that character as an avatar. So you have to really sit there, read the pages and go, okay, I am that person. I understand why they're getting scared. I know, what the risks are, what the stakes are behind why this person's afraid, what will happen if they do leave the house that they're about to inherit from whoever it is, and they have to stay in there for whatever the money is, whatever the story is. But you need to have someone that people care about. Otherwise, when people do eventually get affected or killed, as is the case, obviously in lots of horror books, they don't care. So finding someone relatable, finding someone that speaks to the reader, and then leaving all of that fear, all of that all those breadcrumbs to roll up, amalgamate until you've got this sickening monster at the end that makes them want to scream.
Giant snowball of breadcrumbs is how I imagined that there.
That's what I have every morning for breakfast.
It's sort of a gruesome conglomeration of metaphors there.
Oh yeah.
That was beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that. What about yourself, Matty? Do you have any specific ones that you like to go to, or do you like to borrow from other genres or something else?
Well, I'm really tapping into the conventions of mystery or suspense, depending on what I'm going for. Some of the Ann Kinner books are more suspense in the sense that you know whodunit. Some of them are true whodunit mysteries, but I'm not really relying on the ghost to be providing the scares. So a good example of that is in one of the books. Ann Kinner has a showdown at the end of the book with a a spirit that's been pursuing her. But in a lot of ways, that confrontation plays out more or less like it would if that person had shown up in person. The only difference is that because he's a spirit, he has to almost be fooling her into doing things that are going to be dangerous for her. Like he can't do it himself. He has to fool her into it or trick her into it. And it isn't until she realizes that she doesn't have to fall into that she gets out of that situation. So it's not here's the reveal of the ghost who intrinsically themselves is going to be scary. It's just the circumstance that arises, which I think is interesting because there's so many different ways you can put a ghost to work in a story. But one thing that I do enjoy is if I have scenes with Anne Kinnear and a dead person and another person, and Anne and the dead person are having a conversation, I always have to write out all the dialogue. Then I have to go through and highlight the parts that Anne is saying, because the third person in the room is only going to be hearing her side of the conversation. And so I have to make sure that anything they say or do or know is based on only her side of the conversation. And then oftentimes I'll go back and I'll adjust her dialogue, because you can actually have a lot of fun with that. Like if the person's only hearing her side of the conversation, they might misunderstand, or they might make assumptions that they shouldn't about what the dead person was saying. So, but other than that, it's more the same. The ghost is scary in the same way that they would have been scary or not scary when they were alive.
I love that. It really feels like you're making your ghost sort of main characters almost. They're playing a massive part in the plot and stuff, not just
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I imagine those sort of dual conversations can end up in some funny situations too.
Yeah, those are fun to work on.
What about you, Kristina? Do you have some specific techniques you'd like to share with us?
For me, it's twofold. So my background in writing romance and women's fiction influences how I tell the stories, because there's always the balance of the family drama and the workplace drama and the romance alongside the supernatural elements. And it's never either or. They are in equal balance and they influence each other. Like ghosts and demons ruined Edie's love life, for example. Will it recover? It influences the backstory of the entire family that the series focuses on. So it's a balance of the two. And the other thing is, when I fall down those research rabbit holes, I often discover things that I would like to play with. Like, I'm trying to think of an example, like the mummy thing. Actually, I just really wanted to write about ancient Egypt, and I really wanted to write about crazy Victorian doctors. So yeah, it's those kind of rabbit holes. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a fun trope. Oh, what about this one? And that's basically what I've been doing. I've got 14 or 15 books planned for the Afterlife Cause series, and they're all focused on a different trope or a different theme that ties in with what the characters are experiencing, but also their growth as people. And that kind of ongoing character arc, particularly for Edie, who's 17, 18 in the series, is really important, because they are her formative years, and she's realized she is really, really powerful and terrified of that power. She's not power hungry. She wants rid of it, but it also makes her a target. So she needs that power to protect herself. So it's about balancing that and those very real emotions that we feel as teenagers, and that feel a lot deeper when you're a teenager as well. Obviously, most of us don't have powers like that. So when I say real emotions, I don't mean like fear of being super powerful in that regard.
But like, for yourself.
Well, I don't know. Maybe one of you does, or someone listening does. But you know what I mean? That fear, that anxiety, all those different things that do feel heightened when you are that age.
Absolutely, yeah. That makes a big difference. And as I like to joke about all the time, you're very good at putting your characters through absolute hell, and that's a good way to do it. I do want to just remind everyone, if anyone watching has any questions you would like to ask any of us, then just put them in the chat. I can see we have 2 already, but there's put them in there. I'll ask them anything. I don't care.
No, don't say that, Ellie.
No, I will.
I'll
Anything
answer
you like.
anything.
Yeah. In which case, then, I want to know if any of you have a favorite ghost story. Any takers on that one? Anything that comes to mind quickly?
I have got one, if I can go
Go
first.
ahead. Go first, yeah.
So mine's got a bit of backstory to it, actually, and I would go and get the paperback off my bookshelf, but I'm in my pajamas, so I'm not moving.
Hey, we're sharing on today's podcast, apparently. So
yeah. So after my nan passed away in 2019, you can imagine how horrible that was. She was the woman who raised me, Ellie. It's one of the reasons we became friends. You really supported me during that time. I'm playing with the stress ball, by the way, if anyone wondered what that was on the camera. And yeah, it was really hard. And I actually got into reading a series called The World of the Gateway by E.E. Holmes. And it's a ghost series set in a school. And the main character is prophesized to basically destroy not just the school, but the entire community of people who help ghosts. And these women are gateways to help ghosts cross over. And the men are their protectors. And there's a lot about disrupting those gender norms when people don't want to fit into those gender norms. And the main character doesn't like being told what to do. I don't know why you think why I might find her relatable. Don't comment, Ellie. But yeah, the World of the Gateway was just a massive source of comfort for me. And I think that was when I really got into ghost stories and horror, because it was that, no, I don't believe in ghosts, but actually the possibility would be nice, and also confronting that fear of death. And I think that that's also why ghosts have become so big again, because of the pandemic. And, you know, witches were popular during the pandemic because we all wanted to change reality. But now it is that period of grief and confronting those horrors that we did all live through, that kind of shared grief as the world completely changed, as the climate changes. You know, everyone was touched by COVID in some way. So yeah, it's The World of the Gateway by E.E. Holmes for me.
That's good. I like that. I started reading the series actually and can confirm it's very good, but I have a terrible habit of not finishing things. So that's not a reflection on the series. What about yourself, Matty? Do you have a favorite ghost story?
One that always pops into my mind when I'm asked this question is, there was a movie with Nicole Kidman a number of years ago called The Others. And it was, that was great. And it was one of these ones, I'm a big one for a twist. So I was also a big fan of The Sixth Sense. But the twist at the end of The Others was great. And I keep wanting to watch it again. You guys might be able to watch it. I can't. It's not available. I don't think it's available in the US on any of the streaming services. But I just remember it was one of those, like, it's sort of what you expect, but then they decide to change one little thing. And that's my favorite kind of story, where there's some tweak that the screenwriter or the author has made. And that was not only a fun movie from that point of view, but it was also just a beautiful movie to watch. As I recall, it was very cinematically lovely. And so that's one I would throw out there for anyone who has access to it. The Others with Nicole Kidman.
Good. At the time, I remember at the time, I think the movie is a 12 over here. And I don't think I was much older than 12 when I watched it, but I was like super into watching super scary stuff at the time. So I was like, oh, it's only a 12. It's not going to be that scary. It freaked me out so much. Like, you rewatch it, and the second time you watch it, it's scarier because now you know what's happening, right? Yeah.
And I like those ones that rely on creepiness, not like gore or jump scares and things like that. To me, the creepy part is the fun part.
Definitely. What about you, Dan? I expect to have a favorite ghost story too.
Also, I mean, Poltergeist will always have fondness in my heart, only because that was the first real horror movie that I watched. And you know, that's of its time now, but I do still just have that warm part in my stomach where I was like, yeah, that was, you know, the first big one. Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House is kind of my go-to recommendation, and it's like, you know, cliche, especially amongst horror writers, but it's phenomenal from start to finish. It's brilliant. I will put a shout out as well to that House of Leaves book, which again, it's not really technically a ghost story, but it has all of the elements of fear of the unknown that you could interpret as a ghost story. And I was just Googling the name because I can never remember it. It's Mark Z. Danielewski. And it's one of the best, most creative books in the sense that it's not just one story all the way through. It's told through journal fragments, handwritten letters, and the actual text itself tells the story and kind of like zooms in and zooms out and goes like, he gets so creative with the pages that it's an absolute masterpiece. So if anyone hasn't read House of Leaves, I do recommend it.
I've been looking for some new horror, so these are all going on my list.
Oh, it's good.
I'm going to join in and share one of my own, and it's a Stephen King film, Diary of Ellen Rimbauer, which is based on, I believe, a real diary. Maybe it was slightly fictionalized. That's not a word. But this diary of this woman in like early 20th century in America, talking about all the goings on in the house, and it's effectively a haunted house story. But the house is like, built on an ancient Indian burial ground, and all these deaths happen as it's being built. But then the house tells her that she has to keep building the house and then she'll never die. And so the house keeps growing, and as such it moves itself, and people get lost and people die, and it's really great. I mean, for Stephen King as well, I mean, a lot of his stuff is a lot darker, I think, but this I think is very well done, and the story and the characters make a big difference in that one, because you just root for the main character to kill a husband, which is always a sign of a good story.
What is this saying about you, Ellie?
I mean, you have to watch it. He deserved it.
We believe
that made me think of another one that surprisingly by Anne Rivers Siddons, The House Next Door. Has anyone read that? That was very good.
Did that recently get made into a film?
Not that I know of, but
in a trailer.
Don't go by me. And evidently that seemed like the only kind of ghosty thing. I had never read anything by her before, and I just happened upon that and loved it. And then I started looking through all her other books, and I was like, yeah, none of them seem to be more like that. But that was one of those fun, super creepy ones.
Excellent. In which
I'm
case,
sorry, I've got to highlight Kennedy's comment before we move on, Ellie. because of the things in your basement.
Yeah, Kennedy said don't check Ellie's basement, and to be honest, I do jokingly refer to it as my murder basement, but that's just because it looks creepy. It's not because I murdered anyone.
There was a table in there.
There's a
on.
table. There's a table in there. I don't think there's red stuff. There's like a table in there that's kind of like how I described it was a good height to do an autopsy. I mean, it's just a coincidence. I didn't do an autopsy.
This is why my brain imagined blood, because of how you described it.
Kristina
I won't
won't
go
in
in
my
Ellie's basement. I won't.
No, I mean, there is a lock on the
claustrophobic,
door,
for the
but it's
record.
broken. Anyway, I didn't murder anyone. Just in case anyone was wondering. Shall we? We have a few questions from our lovely audience today. Do you want to put those up on screen for me, Kristina?
Yep.
So
okay,
first
awesome.
and foremost, Kennedy would like to hear some things about pacing. So does anyone have any advice on how they deal with pacing in a horror story or in their ghost story? Matty.
my piece of advice, regardless of the story, is shorter is almost always better. And I don't know that there's ever been an exception to the rule that I'll sort of frame out the story and then I'll step back and find every possible way to make it cover a shorter period of time. So I'm just working on my first novella, which is actually takes place right after book 3 of the Lizzie Ballard series, The Iron Ring. And when I first framed it out, it probably covered, I don't know, weeks. I don't even know what the original duration was, but I've now gotten it down to 2 days, which is just much, much better for pacing than a couple of weeks. So yeah, I say frame it out and then strip out all the possible interruptions in between scenes that slow things down.
Definitely keep those tensions high for a short time, and then it's just no time to stop and breathe, just all fear.
Yeah. Give people a little breather here and there, but don't say like, and then 3 weeks later. No.
Yeah, kills the suspense. What about you, Dan? Do you find pacing to be something you focus on a lot, obviously, in the horror stuff you write?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of just jumping a little bit on what Matty said then, like, I don't think it's a genre dependent thing, is pacing. Like, you have your general how a story should work and your arcs, and, you know, if you study story structure and go through all the different curves and graphs and things, they all generally look the same no matter the genre. So like, one thing that I personally like to do is I like to start with that kind of prologue-esque style thing where I'll jab in and start to build the suspense, have that isolated scene where you get the reader to understand what the intrigue is for the story and why it kind of matters in that small bubble, and then, you know, just build it up as the story goes on. And for me, the way that I approach story, I'm very much I always talk about pantsing and plotting as being on a spectrum. So if number 1 is I'm a make up stories without any plan, and number 10 is fully planning everything, I'm about a 3 or a 4. So I will have a rough idea of what my ending is. And then what I try to do is write that first draft just as quickly as possible. Just tell that story, get that on the page, because most of the time, if I'm writing it faster and if I'm in that moment and if I'm there with the story, then the pacing kind of comes, because there's not like, you know, 2-3 weeks between writing sessions in which I'm trying to remember what happened. I'm feeling the story as I go. And then when it comes to editing the story, it's, you know, same as what Matty says, you try and cut out those bits where you feel that it's lagging, but then it's obviously difficult to know all of that yourself and how a reader will perceive it. So I'll kind of, in, you know, the next couple of stages, then hand that story to someone, maybe a couple of people, just to then get their feedback and say, you know, did this keep you pulling through, or any points where you wanted to put the book down? I love a good vomit draft. That's literally how I write all of my stories. But yeah, so it's a process. Like, pacing, I don't think it's something that you're always going to get right in that first draft. That's definitely why you need those multiple rounds of working through the story, and most importantly, getting that feedback from readers, from your critique partners, whoever it is you use, just to kind of hopefully get that feedback and be able to go, okay, this is how I clean it and make it as pacey as possible.
I like that. That's a great argument for a prologue, because I love a prologue.
There's a lot of like, because sorry, just to interrupt. There's a lot of, because I started doing them a fair bit and they work for what I do. And then there was a whole argument of like, are prologues even relevant anymore? Who gives a crap? Like, if they work for you and if you like them and if your readers like them, use them. Do I use them in every story? No, but like, I do use it as a nice technique a lot of the time with horror.
I've seen people like get on their soapbox about prologues, but I like a prologue. Some, yes, it could be cut, but generally speaking, like you say, it's setting that scene, you know, putting the point of why you want to read the story, what's going to be coming next, and then building up to it. I like that. Okay, Kristina, do you have any top tips on keep pacing going in your stories?
Well, first of all, you just made me realize one of my upcoming projects needs a prologue.
You're welcome.
And for me, I start with these. I write down all my key scenes on post-it notes, and then I lay them out on the floor, and they get sniffed by Millie, and she either approves with a lick or walks off in disapproval. And visualizing them in that way, particularly like physically, not on a screen, really helps me find those holes. Like, do I need a scene here? Is too much happening at once? Is too little going on and it's actually dragging a bit? So then I can move them around like a jigsaw. And I find treating any sort of story as a jigsaw really helps, because then I also don't have to write in chronological order if I don't want to. And like, for 95% of my books, I haven't written them chronologically. I start with the fun scenes, which is usually argument scenes, and then work backwards and then write the slower scenes at the end. And I find that writing the slower scenes at the end means there aren't too many of them, but they weave the story together nicely. And also by that point, I'm more emotionally invested because I've written those higher stakes scenes already.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that. I have actually done something similar right here. Look, so my pink ones are the like high tension bits, I guess, so you can see exactly, very, very visually and color coded where they are. I like to see it visually, like Kristina said. So we have a question here from Cassie. She said it's interesting. No,
that's not more of a question. It was a comment, but I thought it was good. It was good to show based on what we were talking about earlier. That was all.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how individuals see fear and authors actually showcase the processing of that fear. That's true. That's true. We authors put in a lot of effort behind the scenes. So Cassie's question then, do you think relatability is more important than likableness? You mentioned relatability earlier, Dan. Yes.
That's my answer. No, absolutely, because like, it needs to be something that people are going to connect with, and that doesn't mean like you have to like that person. I mean, you know, one of King's most popular books is The Shining, and Jack Torrance is an arsehole. Like he's not a likable person, but the story is compelling enough, and his supporting cast are the reason that people keep reading, because you know what the stakes are for, you know, the kid and for his wife and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it helps, I think, sometimes, depending on what genre you're in, obviously, to make them likable. Like horror specifically, you're going to get away with probably being a bit more gritty and, you know, playing with the darker side. But I think it has, like, relatability comes from what are the unifying factors that connect me and you know, just whoever it is that's on the other side of that page. Those kind of day-to-day things that really, like, because I think when we think about writing fiction, we think about these, or can think about these quite lofty concepts, like being really artsy, all this kind of stuff. But for me, the most impactful things that I write tend to be like the day-to-day, like what do they eat for breakfast? You know, if they're using a spoon, is it right or left-handed? Is the spoon like a particular decorative style that reminds them of their nan, and all these kind of like memories and like connections and things that people have. So yeah, just without a doubt, for me, relatability is the key thing. And then it comes down to genre dependence, really, because I'm guessing in things like romance you probably want to like the people, but that's me being totally ignorant to the romance genre.
No, you are right there.
There you go.
It's really hard if you want to challenge expectations in romance, because I'm currently rebranding Hollywood Gossip because I got lynched by romance readers for calling it a romance, because it doesn't have a happy ever after at the end of book 1, but it does at the end of the series. I know. The series does, the book doesn't. And that's kind of the predicament I'm in, is that people who come to Hollywood Gossip from the What Happens In series know Tate and Jack have an on-off romance. It is very, very dramatic, and there's a lot of emotion going on in those books. You know, they're dealing with addiction, grief, eating disorders, life in the spotlight, the pressure of being in the spotlight from a young age, being an orphan. Like, it's actually more horrific than Afterlife Calls, frankly, in terms of what the characters go through. But because of that, I have to be really careful how I market it, because it's going to be people who are more interested in the kind of psychological reads and human nature than people who are just in it for the romance. But at the same time, they've got to be okay with romance because the central theme is the romance. So it's a really hard one. But yeah, I think in romance, you do want an element of likableness, but stuff like a save the cat moment towards the beginning can be really helpful. Can someone explain save the cat, please? Because my brain's like not braining.
Yeah, well, just quickly as well, I think relatability can sometimes create likability. Like, it's easy to like people that you relate to. But yeah, the save the cat is, you know, if you've got someone who is a bit harder to like, give them a moment in the beginning when they show something like heroic. It only has to be something small. The whole idea of save the cat is like, you know, a man's walking across the street, he's horrible, blah, 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 but he's just picked a cat out of the tree and saved him and then got on with his day. We know then that there's a glimpse of good in him and that they're not just a total arsehole, which obviously then changes fundamentally how you see them for the rest of the book, because it opens up that door to go, okay, there's good in them that might come out, and gives them those opportunities to shine.
This happens. I think the example that popped into my head is The Witcher, because I feel like he's not that likable. Like, he's not that exciting of a character. He's not that nice of a person, but he's very relatable. You know, he you know, is trying to do good generally. He's trying to make a bit of money just to get some food and a bed to sleep in, which, you know, is a great thing to do. And he has those save the cat moments where he is genuinely doing good things with Ciri and stuff. But is he that likable? As a person, I wouldn't say so. He
doesn't really earn anything like big in the sense of like, you probably wouldn't hug him. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like,
well, I thought it was interesting.
All right. Go on, mate.
I remember reading somewhere that one of the reasons that Stephen King did not like the movie The Shining is that he didn't like Jack Nicholson, because everybody knows Jack Nicholson is going to go crazy. Like, the idea was that Jack Torrance is like a normal guy until he shows up at the Overlook Hotel, and that if you send Jack Nicholson up to the Overlook Hotel, you pretty much know something really bad is going to happen. And that he liked, I think his name was Steven Weber, who was in the U.S. comedy show Wings, as more of like an everyman, because it's, you know, he seemed like, you know, the guy next door, and then he goes up to the Overlook and goes crazy. But the question about likability is really on my mind these days, because I was working on the 4th Lizzie Ballard thriller, and I was contending with a situation where at the end of book 3, there's Lizzie, and then there's Lizzie's archenemy, Louise Mortensen. And the way book 3 ends, the next scene with Louise has to be seconds after her last scene in book 3, just the way it's set up. The next scene with Lizzie could be weeks, maybe months after the last scene in book 3. And so I was struggling for a while with how to like get everybody going in the same direction in book 4. And I finally decided to do a novella with Louise Mortensen, arch enemy. And I have to say, I love Louise Mortensen, but and readers like her too. But I'm really having fun thinking about how to make someone want to read a novella worth of material about the woman who has been standing against the person everybody loves, Lizzie, and make her relatable. I never want to make her likable, but I need to make her relatable to keep people with the story. And it's a really, really fun exercise. I'm maybe having more fun with this novella than I have in writing anything
I did
for
that
a long time.
For Trinity, one of my characters. She has like a fake celebrity memoir, and everyone who's read it's like, why have you just made me sympathize with this woman who terrorized people I like for like 8 books? I'm like,
Yep.
You're welcome.
Because everyone's got 2 sides. That's the reality of it. Like
Exactly.
the worst villains are the flat villains. They're the ones that you just go. No one is born so evil that that's all they can think about. Everyone's got those things that they love. They've got their weaknesses. They've got their Achilles heel. So like, I can totally understand why that's fun for you, Matty.
Yeah, and I find that those villains are the most fun. Like when I was writing about the crazy Victorian doctor in The Mean Girls Murder, it was just fun to lean into how crazy he was and how he started out actually wanting to help people and then got progressively more nutty and power hungry as time went on. And there's part of me's like, this would be a really fun story to write about how these characters weave together. And I'm like, no, I don't want to go into historical fantasy. That's a whole different, no, let's not make more work for myself.
Well, no, I mean, you've got enough genres to cover at the moment.
Yeah, let's not overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
Also, can I just address the fact this isn't my pajama jacket? This is just a shirt.
Like I said,
I just need to address that.
Business on the top, PJs on the bottom.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a question here from Kiz. They said, you mentioned before that you don't need to believe in ghosts, but do you read about real life ghost stories for inspiration or understanding?
I listen to podcasts when I'm walking the dog. There's something about the podcast, like it's more immersive because a lot of ghost stuff that goes on, like it's things we hear a lot of the time, right? And also because I'm just out with the dog making sure she doesn't try to eat grass, I can concentrate more. So some of my favorite podcasts I've already mentioned: Uncanny, the Battersea Poltergeist, The Witch Farm, which are all done by Danny Robbins. Is it Haunted Road that I recommended to you, Ellie, that really freaks you out that one time?
Because I was walking home in the dark and I didn't realize before, but the podcast has got all these like background spooky noises, but I didn't hear them before when I just listened to it on my phone on speaker, like on the side. But with my like nice headphones on, I was like walking down the street like, what's coming for me? That's freaked me out.
Yeah, I didn't notice those sometimes as well, but at least I was walking in daylight.
That makes a difference when doing scary stuff. Yeah.
I mean, Millie would be a terrible guard dog. She wouldn't protect me at all. She'd roll over for a belly rub or run home, but still.
Well, it's still a distraction in some way.
Do you read a lot of ghost stories?
I mean, I wouldn't say I go out my way. Firstly, hey kids, how's it going? But yeah, I don't necessarily go out my way. It's kind of one of those things where, you know, if I've got a bit of a quiet moment, I might have a look and see what's about there. As I say, when I was sort of ghostwriting a lot of very, very ghosty books, I did a lot of research and kind of looked into the real life ones. And for me, it's, you know, I love going to source. So again, it comes back to those folk tales and where trying to work out the origin of where those come from, because, you know, it's from a different time. Education's different, science is different. And just like, I like what it is that people have invented from those times that might have been a bit lost to time. So there is a book that I want to buy by Flame Tree Publishing, where they put a collection of real life ghost stories together that I would like to get. But it's not kind of my go-to horror thing to do. I tend to go more for sort of these days cosmic horror and that kind of stuff. But like if one presents itself in my lap, I'll read it. I will say as well, I do like watching anything that's kind of haunted on Netflix or anything on TV. There was one which was 28 days. Oh, my mind is not doing good remembering names tonight, but there was like one about like the 28-day haunting or something on Netflix that I watched a few months ago, and I binged the whole thing because it was just like, it's one of those where you, especially when it's televised, you don't know if it's real or not, but at the same time it's just really, really fun to watch and, you know, see these people react. I'll try and find out the name for that, and because I think you're trying to write it down, aren't you, Matty? I'll try and find out what the name is.
I think it is just something
making
like
notes.
28 Days Haunted.
Yeah,
Because
I
I
think
remember
it's
seeing it.
yeah, because the idea is that it's all these people kind of literally blindfolded. They're all like spiritualists and telepaths, you know, all these clairvoyants, and they get blindfolded and brought into these very, very historically haunted places, told nothing about what's going on, and they have to figure out what's going on in those places. And they stay for 28 days because there's a theory about the 28-day cycle, and around the 28 days when most of the really big hauntings happen. And it was just fascinating. Like, it's just, you know, whether you believe it or not, you know, it was just fun to watch, and I was just in it. So that kind of stuff I like as well, because you realize how many stories there are like everywhere. And my brother, he runs pubs in Essex in the UK, and the last one that he stayed in was the most haunted pub in Henry VIII's time. So like, it's this huge open place, and obviously like at night it's all closed downstairs, and he used to live in the place above it, and used to hear like the creaks and the whistles and the moans of the house. He never sort of mentioned any ghosts and things, but it's that kind of stuff where just all the hype and the legend before it is just, it's just very, very interesting.
That's really cool. I like that idea that you can pull from all those interesting things. What about yourself, Matty? Do you read a lot of ghost stories and pull inspiration from them?
I think I more draw inspiration from a writing craft point of view, like seeing how movies like The Others and, you know, Blair Witch and these things that I've enjoyed as a reader or a viewer, how they're achieving the effect that I want to achieve. So it's less about learning about the ghosts or learning about the background of hauntings and things like that, as it is more understanding how those stories can be constructed in order to get the desired effect.
That makes perfect sense. It's useful to see how other people are doing it, right? And sort of sometimes mimic that kind of setup and that kind of structure. Yep. Absolutely.
I've just checked it is 28 Days Haunted on Netflix.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. We have another question from the lovely Cassie here. What do you think of the idea that you're all processing your own fears in a unique way because of your own experiences, and that nobody would be able to share your stories in the same way that you do? What a question. What a question. Anyone have any ideas on that one?
I just want to say that I agree with that. I do think that there is an element of using storytelling to process your own fears, consciously or subconsciously. Like, most of my author friends I've spoken to have written about things that have happened in their life in a disguised way, shall we say. And there are certain things in all of my books that are tied to my personal experiences that I think probably only like 2 or 3 people know are from my past. And it's not something I would share and go, this is because of that. But writing about it helped me process that situation and maybe get out a teensy bit of anger and resentment, just a teensy bit. It's therapeutic.
I was going to say, that's really good therapy. On a slightly lighter note, my first novel is about a wizard who has no faith in his own abilities, who doesn't believe in himself whatsoever, and is sort of forced into situations where he has to fall back on his own skills and realizes he can do a lot more than he gives himself credit for. And I don't know where I got that idea from, but
imagine that.
Imagine that.
No comment. I'm not. No.
Definitely, I can definitely relate to those things, and it's a way to deal with it in a way, and it's a worthwhile storytelling, at least in my experience, because if you've been through it, other people have been through it, right? So you can share those experiences and share that kind of therapy in a way. People are going to read it and get a bit of therapy the same way you get a bit of therapy writing it, I suppose. I know you mentioned before you do that, Dan, write about people's fears and things. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, well, I get harangued a lot for the fact that I've killed dogs in my stories, and
what? Why?
So this is it. Like, one of I've grown up with dogs. I'm very much a dog person, and so
I thought you said bugs.
No, dogs.
You said killing bugs, and I was like, who
No, he went
Grandma.
worse. He went worse, Ellie.
I thought you, yeah, dog. I can see why people would be upset about that. Okay,
Exactly.
sorry, Daniel, carry
For
on.
me, as someone who loves dogs, when I'm writing a story, what's the go-to thing I'm going to think of as a horrific thing to write about? Like, it's going to be that. And yeah, it's a way of processing your own fears. But I think, just generally speaking, because that question, I think, is going beyond fears and into, you know, just how do you find confidence in writing your own experiences? Like, if you're not writing from the heart, if you're not writing stuff that is yours, if you're not letting yourself tell your story, then you're not taking advantage of what writing can do, because it's impossible for, like, if all four of us on this call right now were given the outline to Titanic, the outline to the others, any of these like stories that exist in the world, and was said the exact same outline and said, write these, every single one of us would write something different, because we've all got different people that we know. We'd see, you know, different emotions, different fears, different things from our past that we would then project into the characters. It's impossible to write a story and not put experiences in. And I would argue that's one of the greatest strengths of writing stories, and something that I really, really push for people to do, is even if you think you've lived a very uncharmed life, very, very dull, even if you think you work a boring job and you've got nothing to contribute to a story, you're wrong, because no one has lived the life that you've lived. No one's been through the things that you've been through. And ultimately, anyone who's been in somewhat a similar situation is going to want to find you because of that relatability. So whenever people are like, oh, I don't think I know enough to put out a story into the world, it's absolute bullshit, because everyone has that bubble of something to be able to go, here's a story that will speak, that will tell a part of something that other people will never see. And yeah, I just think it's a beautiful thing. And it's a shame that you kind of have to, I mean, I get it. I totally get like that imposter syndrome, where it comes from. But it's a shame sometimes you have to coax people into being like, you have something worth saying, no matter what genre or story that is.
Sometimes it's hard to believe it. I can definitely say it's hard to believe it sometimes. But I mean, everyone's got something interesting to say. I do truly believe that, even if they're not quite sure how to put that into a story or a book yet.
Yeah, and what I would argue is that my most effective stories in communicating with readers are the ones in which I really let myself speak from the heart. Similar to kind of like what you were saying, Christine. You know, you don't always tell the people what it is. But I've just written it's about a 20,000 word novella that I'm kind of out with a few readers at the minute, and it is probably one of the most personal stories I've ever written. And because of that, it allowed me to really reach like this depth. And obviously, it's just speaking for myself at this point, like it's still untested. But I really I'm proud of it in the sense like it's reached a depth that some of the other stories I've written haven't quite reached. And I'm hoping that it will sort of relate to people in a way that others won't, because there is really sort of like a vulnerability to it. It's very authentic, and I kind of just let myself go, this is the story. Like, let's actually really reach down into the well of who I am and go, cool, let's write some scary stuff.
Good, more catharsis. Perfect. What about yourself, Matty? Do you find any of your real life fears coming up for Anne?
I'm sure there are, but I don't know that I'm really aware of them, except insofar as Anne Kinnear is sort of a younger, thinner, and spirit-sensing version of me. So many of the things you read about Anne, I'm taking from my own experience and how I would react in situations like that. I'm not really using it. I'm not using the ghost story aspect to address fears of my own. Yeah, it's all baked in there, but I'm probably the worst person to be answering that question about my own books.
I suppose in a way, if a lot of yourself is in the main character, they're living out all these experiences that you don't get to, even if it's not your fears that they're going through, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that one of the personal challenges. Sorry, that's my dog shaking in the background. I don't know if you can see her back there.
We accept dog interruptions on this podcast. That's fine.
One of the things that Anne is contending with is this hesitance she has to engage with people because she's afraid. She's had the experience of having an important relationship break up because the person didn't believe she could do what she could do. He thought she had psychological problems, and having a small pool of people that she felt comfortable with. And that idea of having a small pool of people that you're comfortable with is definitely from me. I don't know that that's driven by a fear of people refusing to believe, something that I'm putting forward as a an ability I have, but I'm sure that somewhere if you tease that out long enough, I'm sure that there's some connection that is what appealed to me about writing that for Anne.
And as there should be, it's a good way to do it, right? Like I said, if you've been through it and you can relate to it, other people are going to relate to it. Absolutely. We have another question from Cassie here. Oh, no, this is just a comment, sorry. She says, it reminds me of the Winchester's widow. She was told that she would be haunted by the ghosts of men who were killed by her dead husband's rifle, the Winchester rifles. And so she built her house until she died. Yeah, I have seen that, actually. There's a YouTube channel called The Watcher that I like. And they go and visit on there. These two guys who one really believes and one really doesn't believe. And so it makes for quite an interesting dynamic. If anyone wants to watch some, like, interesting ghost in haunted investigations by two great hosts, I think personally. They go to all sorts of places and do things. I'm sure that one was on there, or I've heard it somewhere else before. And yeah, that's similar. You'll keep building the house and you'll never die. It says,
I have been to that house. It is super fun.
Have you? Is it near to where you live then, Matty?
No, it's in California, and I was visiting a relative. This was many years ago, but I did go, and it's
I like that.
bizarre place.
Use the idea of visiting a relative to go to see cool haunted spots. I see what you did there.
Yes.
Cassie also says here, I don't know if Josh would agree, Kristina. That was pretty horrific. I can't remember what we were talking about at the time, but that does sound
I was saying that what happens in Hollywood Gossip is worse than what happens in Afterlife Calls. And when I made that comment, I had forgotten what I did to Josh and his mother. That they are very traumatized. Yeah, okay, Cassie's right. Cassie is right. Let's leave it there. Yeah, let's not say what I did to my characters, but it was mean.
No, we'll leave it as a surprise. Should we relate, in terms of relating to characters, should we relate to the spirit or the ghost? I suppose that depends, because you, like you, Matty, you have your ghost doing quite a lot in your stories. Do you try and make them relatable?
Yeah, I would try to make all my characters relatable in one way or the other. I think the only exception to that would be in the Lizzie books, which are not ghost stories, but there was one character that I just had to have be a psychopathic force of evil because I needed to set up kind of a moral dilemma for Lizzie to face. But other than that, I felt I had to do that as a plot mechanism. But other than that, I want to make all my characters relatable, and the ghosts are relatable in the same way they would be if they weren't dead, So some of them you relate to, and like some of them you relate to and don't like. Look, did you notice that my curtain moved?
Spooky.
I know. Yeah, it's just the dog leaving.
What about you, Dan? In terms of your monsters, who are sort of just the monster and not necessarily a main character in that way, do you still try and make them relatable?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. The question I throw back is, well, not the question. It depends. What is it you're trying to do with them? Because if they get a part of the story, if they're sort of modern monsters and they help serve what it is that you're trying to tell, then absolutely they need to be relatable in some way, because it just makes that sort of drama a lot higher. But then I've got creatures that I've written about that they don't relate in any way to what is happening, because they're obstacles. So it's kind of choosing how you use them, whether they're tools to move them forward, whether they're obstacles for them to overcome. It just really depends on the story. There's not really sort of, for me, a definitive yes or no to that one.
Fair enough. And yourself, Kristina, I know a lot of your ghosts have great backstories anyway, so I imagine you try and make them relatable.
Yeah, it's for me it's easier if I do make them relatable, just because of the way that I think and the way that I write. There are a couple of characters I've got coming up that might be less so, but I think sometimes it's actually scarier if these people doing horrific things have relatable motivations. And I always try and come up with something unique or different or human for that motivation, even if that character isn't human. Like, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but at the end of The Witch's Sacrifice, the motivation of the big bad that's been building for the last 4 books is revealed. And it's one of those moral questions, like, actually, if I was in that situation, might I have felt the same and been compelled to do the same thing? But at the same time, he is trying to hurt people. Oh, Cassie just said Thomas was really relatable, and I can't believe what she can't believe what I did. Yes. Thomas isn't the big bad I was talking about. Thomas is a 10-year-old Victorian ghost in a flat cap with a football who haunts the local cemetery in my town. And then I weirdly found a gravestone for an 8-year-old boy called Thomas after I created his character, which isn't creepy at all.
It is creepy because it's the exact graveyard that you're writing about that you visit. So that is a very creepy coincidence.
Yeah. Although that sounds weird now you say that I visit it. I like walking the dog through there because it's atmospheric. Cassie's giving the Mean Girls Murder a nice plug for me as well. Thank you, Cassie.
Ah, yes. Mean Girls
Are
Murder.
we ready
Kristina's
for the last
latest
question?
book. Our very last question. Let's do it. What is the spookiest thing that has ever happened to you? Dan, do you want to go first on this one? You look
No, I'll have
nice
a
and
think on that
distressed.
one. Someone else can go first.
I would
I'll have a
like
think.
to say I've got nothing.
Well, spoil
Like,
sport. What about you, Matty? Do you
So
have any
this was-
spooky stories to share?
I did. This was not really so much spooky in a specifically ghostly way, but I love going to Mount Desert Island, Maine, and a couple of the Anne Kinnear stories are set there. And I had never been there in the winter, so I decided I was going to go up in January. I went up by myself. As you can imagine, there are not a lot of tourists in Maine in January. And so I was in Southwest Harbor, Maine, at a place called Sips, which is sadly no longer there. And I decided I was going to write a short story, an Anne Kinnear short story that was based in Mount Desert Island in January. So I wanted to walk down to the docks. I knew that the climactic scene was going to happen in the docks. So I was going to walk from the restaurant down Clark's Point Road to the town docks where this climactic scene would happen. And so I did that. It was, creepy and freezing cold. And I got there. And my second book, The Sense of Reckoning, is based on a fictionalized Claremont Hotel, which is at the end of Clark Point Road in Southwest Harbor. And so it's not open during the winter. But I thought, you know what? As long as I'm down here and nobody's around, I'm going to go walk around the Claremont Hotel. And so I'm like creeping around in the middle of the night practically at the Claremont Hotel. And if ever a ghost was going to show up in my life, it would have been then, because it was creepy. And I'm also very glad that I didn't encounter like the Claremont Hotel off-season security guard as I was walking around, because in retrospect, I realized it was kind of a stupid thing to do. But it was so atmospheric, and I was able to channel some of that atmosphericness into the short story I wrote, which is called Close These Eyes. But maybe there was a ghost following me, and I just wasn't quite tuned in enough to it to know, because if it was going to happen, it would have happened there.
Could be. I mean, what's a little trespassing? Who cares about that? It's fine.
That did remind me of something. It's not massive. It's not as good as Matty's. But every so often when I'm walking Millie, she hates walks already. She's not a dog that enjoys walks at all. But she will keep looking behind her as if someone's following us. Like, she'll just stop and stare. Keep walking a bit. Stop. Stare. And it, like, her posture and her expression and stuff says that something spooked her. But there is absolutely no one else there. No sights, no sounds. Nothing has changed. Because I walk around somewhere that's relatively quiet in the middle of the day.
The graveyard.
But she's
The graveyard.
No, well, but this is a different route. This is a different route. The graveyard is actually really quiet as well, but not as quiet as the other one. So yeah, I actually find the graveyard less spooky than this estate, probably because it's right in the middle of the town center, so you can still hear like people and cars and stuff. Whereas the other estate I walk around, there's nothing, and like unless it's the summer holidays or something, there's no children or anything about, and so it's literally just me and the dog for this like 10-15 minute route, and she's like acting as if someone is following us, and it's just unbelievably spooky when she does that, because I can't see anything, I can't hear anything, and quite often I'm listening to a ghost podcast, which just makes it worse.
I love that. Millie's just scaring you for fun now. She
does it.
Doing
She
it
does.
to make you scared. Yeah. I'm going to share a quick one and give Dan an extra minute to think about his, because I have had multiple instances in this house where I had doors open. So like one time I was stood in the bathroom and I could see my bedroom door, and I watched it open because my cat wanted to go in. I think the ghost is just trying to get the cat into trouble. But the cat's not normally allowed in there. One time I came down and the basement door was open, the creepy murder basement, aforementioned murder basement. And my cat came running out like he'd had the best time of his life. Again, not allowed in the basement because it's not safe for cats. But the spookiest one was don't give me that look. I meant not safe for cats in terms of it's moldy, not that it's like weapons. The spookiest one was not long after I moved in, I don't think. A friend of mine and myself, we were laying laminate floor in the kitchen, and we were chopping up bits and drinking a glass of wine because wine goes well with power tools. And the glass of wine was on the kitchen side, literally about 2 meters from us. We could see it, and no prompting at all. I think my utensils thing fell over us for some reason and knocked the glass of wine on the floor, and it just smashed. And we're like, the fuck? Like, what? How did that just happen? So yeah, that was one wine glass down, sadly. But
and a cat jumped out at the exact right moment then as well.
Did it? Was that?
Yeah, I don't know which one it was, but one of them jumped off her side as you were like, the fuck?
Yeah, that was the spookiest one because it was just right in front of us, and I was just nothing else could have caused that, Even still, I'm not 100% believer. Do you have a spooky story now, Dan?
I think probably the spookiest one for me, it's not that exciting, is the loft hatch. Like, just because to this day I cannot for the life of me figure out, like, because I thought about winds cutting through the loft or something, but like because of I've put that loft hatch up before, and as I say, it's got these like 2 little anchor hooks, and I have to wedge those to get those in. And I've got a picture somewhere where it's just lifted out and off, and I'm like, well, I'm not sure how that happened. But the only other sort of, I guess, time I really spooked myself was there was a game a few years ago called Dead Space 2, which is very like sci-fi in space, like it's designed to be incredibly scary. And my friend lent it to me and said, just make sure you don't play it at night. So at midnight, I sit in front of the TV, literally about a meter away from the TV, sort of volume on high, sat there, and I think after about maybe 5 minutes tops, I turned it off and went to bed.
It is so atmospheric.
Too much.
And that really plays as well on that fear of the unknown, doesn't it? Because
Yes.
you don't know what's coming.
This is it. There's no like pattern to recognize what's going to go on and where. Everything, it's fantastic.
It's very well done. It's very well done. Perfect. One last question then for everybody. Where can our lovely viewers go to learn more about you and to keep in touch? Matty, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. Thank you so much for this invitation. This has been such a fun conversation. And if people would like to learn more about me, they can go to mattydalrymple.com.
Excellent. Super easy. I like that. Dan, where can our lovely viewers go to keep in touch with you and to find out more?
So I'm a little less easy. I've got 3 places I can send people to. The
Oh,
first one is activatedauthors.com, which is where I do all my author coaching, and we have a 30-day free trial for anyone who wants to test out what we're all about. DanielWillcocks.com, which is WILLCOCKS, is where you can find out all the things that I do. And then also theotherstories.net is where you'll find our award-winning multi-million downloaded horror podcast that comes out with new episodes every single Monday.
Excellent. Thank you. And Kristina, where can we go to find out more about you?
So you can find all my books, fiction, non-fiction, fantasy, not fantasy, at KristinaAdamsAuthor.com, and that is Christine with a K. And also find me on Facebook at Kristina Adams Author. I'm there all the time.
She is. She's obsessed.
Yeah, I have no life.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. I had so much fun talking about ghosts and horror and, realizing our fears in our own writing.
It's been really good.
It's been good. Thank you so
for
much
the
for joining us.
So there we go. We now know how to write ghosts, how to better write ghosts, how to introduce fear. What scares me, I still have not figured out to this day how that hatch opened. It makes no sense to me. But yeah, that's all for this week. As I said at the beginning of the episode, we are jumping on a few-week break. So we'll be back at the beginning of June. Make sure you keep us on your podcast feed. Make sure you join us over there. We'll be doing announcements in all the usual place. But for now, there's nothing else to say. But a massive thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in. We appreciate you and the time you choose to spend with us each and every week. And as always, if you're looking to level up your writing and activate your author career, head on over to www.activatedauthors.com to find out all about our community, our resources, and everything else that we've got going on. One more time from myself and from Luna Bear. We will see you next week.
Activate your energy.
Thanks for listening to the Activated Authors podcast. If you're ready to unlock your true potential and activate your author career, then head on over to www.activatedauthors.com to find out more.